But let's go ahead and get started. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Today's session is going to, we're going to take a look at, briefly, we're going to take a look at the Cherubic Hymn. And then we're going to take some time today to look at and take some time discussing the icon screen or the Iconostasis. And this might get into the more, in terms of what we've looked at so far, this might be the more maybe conceptual, heady, spiritual, mystical. And so it might challenge us a little bit, but that's kind of the point. So let me get my slideshow up for you. Okay, everybody should see the slideshow screen there. And I'm trying to just get my window situated here, because I like being able to see you and what I'm presenting to you. So, all right. Now, just thumbs up. Can everybody see the slideshow that says rational worship? Okay, good. All right. And if you haven't already done so, go ahead and let's see if I can get the chat. Hold on, it's not working here. Sorry, folks. Okay. I'm just going to drop in the chat box for now the link to the liturgy text that we've been doing this whole time. I can't find it now. Okay, maybe not. Oh, there it is. Okay. Sorry, everybody. I am running out of screen real estate here. Okay, so that's the link to the text for the liturgy on ages. And I'm going to close that, move you all over, and then we'll get started. Okay. If you pull up the liturgy text, or if you're following along in a book, you can go ahead and make your way to the part where the prayer of the Cherubic Hymn is. Well, let's turn our attention to the slideshow for now. By now, those of us who have been on the journey together, which is just about everybody based on who I can see on my screen, we know that I've, in a way, kind of arbitrarily dissected the liturgy into two parts, which I'm calling kind of entry and communion. And the part that we're doing now, the Cherubic Hymn and the Great Entrance, this is all kind of that transition point, going from entry, because it is an entrance of sorts, right? It's called the Great Entrance, and communion, the focus on the Eucharist, and our communication, our communion with God. Just by way of brief review from last week's session, we talked about and looked at some of the sacred vestments and implements that are, and talked about how they have, of course, their practical aspect. They have a function that they perform, but then also their symbolic or mystical role in our worship. For example, on the practical side with vestments, they clothe the clergy, right? They identify who we are. You see one person dressed a certain way, you say, okay, that's a bishop. You see one dressed another way, that's a priest, a deacon, and so on. And the different implements or vessels that we use, they contain the ritual elements, right? We have a cup that holds the wine. We have a plate that holds the bread. We have a spear that cuts them, a spoon that dispenses them, right? They cover these things. They provide light with candles and so on and so forth. But then there's the mystical aspect, the mystical layer and role of these elements, elements or items. So the vestments and implements, as we said last time, are like part of what makes that icon come into being, the icon of the kingdom, the living icon that the church becomes in the course of the liturgy. So as I worded it here, they are the elements in the mosaic icon of the temple as the kingdom, and they participate in and impart grace. Okay, that's why when you come for confession, the priest doesn't just wave at you and say, okay, thanks for coming today. He takes his epitrachilion that he's wearing and he places it on your head with his hand and pronounces the prayers of forgiveness and the action of the Holy Spirit. Okay, so we saw that the great entrance, and really the whole liturgy, is often depicted in iconography, but it's being celebrated by the holy angels. And you saw, if you remember, I used imagery from our own church here with those, the angels in procession going from and coming to the altar where Christ is presiding. And we're going to see that again today. And we chant the Cherubic Hymn. And this leads us to the first part of tonight's session. Now, here we have this imagery in the background, and what I've pulled up here, it's a big block of text, okay? And I know it might be hard to read on your screen, but if you're looking at a liturgy book and if it has the priest's part in it, or if you're looking at the link that I sent you, it'll have it. This is the prayer of the Cherubic Hymn. You might recall that last time I remarked about how we don't even sing hymns in the church without asking God to grant us the blessing to do it. I mean, think about, if we thought about that in light of everything we do in a 24-hour period, we ask God's blessing to even sing a hymn to him, something we might even take for granted that we would be good to do. So if we ask his blessing to do something like that, are we asking his blessing to eat what we're having for lunch? Are we asking his blessing to get up and go for a walk? Are we asking his blessing before we, I don't know, smoke a cigarette? Now, I use that as a non sequitur example because that's actually what Saint Silouan of Mount Athos did. There's a story about how he encountered a shopkeeper who offered him a cigarette, and he declined. And the shopkeeper was sort of complaining, and he said, "Oh, you know, I like it. It's good for me. I'm stressed out. I'm busy. It gives me a little break. It gives me a chance to have a conversation with somebody." And Saint Silouan says to him, "Okay, make the sign of the cross before you smoke your cigarette." And the shopkeeper says, "Well, that doesn't seem right. I don't feel like I can do that." And he says, "Well, if you can't make the sign of the cross before you do something, maybe you shouldn't do it." So this is not to get on your case if you smoke, but just as an example of how God's blessing is something we can and really should invoke in every aspect of our lives. And so, not surprisingly then, in the course of the liturgy and the worship of the church, we also ask for God's blessing. So there's a prayer associated with the Cherubic Hymn. Now, it's a big block of text. Like I said, we're not going to read through the whole thing necessarily. I just want to point out some, let's say, relevant parts to our gathering here. The first two phrases are very important, or first two sentences. It says, no one bound by carnal desires and pleasures is worthy to approach, draw near, or minister to you, the King of glory. For to serve you is great and awesome, even for the heavenly powers. Okay, so this is invoking and evoking that imagery that we saw, and it's kind of, you can see it kind of faintly in the background here, of the angelic liturgy, right? So even for the angels, this is an awesome experience. Okay, so none of us is worthy because of all of our worldly cares, all of the things that we think about, all the things we desire, all the things that we that our attention goes to. Remember, we said that the angels have that almost immediate experience of God. And for them, it's still awesome. And for us, we're kind of numbed by the cares of life. So that's why it starts out in this very poignant, strong way, that no one who is bound to carnal desires and pleasures is worthy to approach God and minister to him. It goes on to say that, but because of God's mercy and because he knows our weaknesses, but because he is perfect, and yet he condescended to come down and to save us, and that he's the one who gave us this liturgy. We ask him, and when I say we here, I'm speaking of the priest in particular. Okay, remember, we said there are prayers that are for the clergy in particular, and then those that have a greater scope. So it says here, look down on me, your sinful and unprofitable servant, and cleanse my soul and heart of a wicked conscience, and enable me, by the power of your Holy Spirit, clothed with the grace of the priesthood, to stand before your holy table and celebrate the mystery. So we're asking God, in a sense, on one hand, to join in with the angels in their worship, but also just confessing the magnitude of God's mercy in light of our sinfulness, to be able to even stand here and use our imperfect vessels to conduct this amazing event that is occurring, and is now at this point in the liturgy starting to unfold in a much more dramatic way. And then it says to God, for you are the one who both offers and is offered, the one who is received and is distributed. So underscoring that this liturgy is not ours. It's not our invention. It's not something that we've done. It's not something that we've contrived. It's not something that we do if we feel like it. This is his. And we are participating in it with his permission and with his great mercy. So this is what sets the stage for this cherubic hymn. Now, what I've presented to you here is the text of this hymn, which comes to us from about I think it's the 6th century. It's not really my intention to go really into the history of this hymn tonight. But this is the text that those of us who are familiar with the liturgy would be familiar with. Let us who mystically represent the cherubim and who sing the thrice holy hymn to the life-creating Trinity, now lay aside every worldly care, so that we may receive the King of all, who is invisibly escorted by the angelic hosts. There's really a lot in this hymn. One of the things about this hymn is that, remember how we talked about in the first part of the liturgy, we talked about the antiphons, and we talked about the singing of these sort of anthems, right? We talked about the apolitikion for the church, the festal hymn, the hymn of the day, the at the intercessions of the Theotokos, save us, O Son of God, and even to an extent the Trisagion hymn, the thrice holy hymn. That these are meant to be engaged in by the people, by everyone, to chant all together in unison. But the cherubic hymn, over time, developed this sort of status as this spectacular hymn that was sung. In some cases, it was sung by the people, but eventually it became something that was sung by the more specialized musicians in the community. And the reason for that was to convey, on one hand, what was being said in that prayer that we just read, but then also to really, really draw out the text, the meaning of the text, even paradoxically, to go beyond meaning. I'll say more about that later. But it says, let us who mystically represent the cherubim. Again, there's that word mystery, right? We are somehow, you and I, in all of this are being linked up with these angels who are performing this liturgy at the throne of God. And we sing the thrice holy hymn to the life-creating Trinity. Now, we sang the thrice holy hymn, we sang the Trisagion, didn't we? Agios o Theos, Agios Ischiros, Agios Athanatos eleison imas. Holy God, holy mighty, holy immortal, have mercy on us. And we're going to later sing another, and the more original thrice holy hymn, Holy, holy, holy Lord Sabaoth, heaven and earth are full of your glory. Right? So the cherubic hymn actually falls kind of right in the middle of those two. So it's not saying that we are engaging in a song right now as the people of God. It's saying we are acting like the angels. We are performing the angelic work. That's what this hymn means. And it's saying, now let us set aside every worldly care. Forget what you have to do for work tomorrow. Forget what so-and-so said about what you were wearing today. Forget about the fact that the waiter didn't bring you your drink in time. Forget about the fact that your insurance is going to lapse. Whatever it is, it's time to set those things aside. Why? So that we can receive Christ. Because here he is invisibly escorted by the angelic hosts. You may recall from the small entrance, do you remember the prayer where we were asking God to allow the angels to enter with us and to engage in this worship with us? There's a recent saint, I want to say David. That's not right. He was at the monastery of St. David. I can't remember his name. Shame on me. But he was asked about the liturgy, and he said that he couldn't move in the altar because of all the angels that were there. And it's those insights, those moments of insight beyond the other veil that make us think for a minute about what's going on in the liturgy. Saint Iakovos Tsalikis, that's who it is. He was recently canonized a saint. So this is the cherubic hymn that we're used to. Now, here's another one that's actually older, and we sing it on Holy Saturday. Okay, this is older. It's not just an Orthodox Christian hymn. It's sung by other traditions as well. But this one, listen to this one. Let all mortal flesh, that's you and me, keep silent and stand in fear and trembling, giving no thought to the things of earth. There's those daily cares, right? Let those things go. Because the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords is coming forth to be sacrificed and given as food to the faithful. Before him goes the choir of angels, with all the principalities and powers, the many-eyed cherubim and six-winged seraphim, covering their faces and chanting their hymn, Alleluia. So again, from an even older text, I think this pulls from the prophecy of Habakkuk, that it's our place really to kind of shut up right now, and let the church, of course, has put people like me as the priest there to perform a function. Just like the other priests, the deacon, whatever altar servers have been selected to serve, the choirs, okay? And we have a particular role that we have to perform, that we have to undertake. And what these hymns are doing are inviting really all of us, but it's really speaking to the laity who are there, the majority of the people who are there, who are coming from all different walks of life, who are coming with all different kinds of cares of life. It's saying, be silent, stop complaining, stop thinking, stop chatting, turn off the chatter in your head, because Christ is coming. Okay? And it really is there to set the mood for what is coming next in the liturgy. So here's the image that we saw last time from our own dome here at St. Nektarios. Okay, you'll remember I kind of highlighted how here are the angels in this procession. Okay, and it's kind of this, if you really look at the imagery, there's direction to it, but then it kind of all comes back to one place, and it's, your mind wants to make a circle with it, but you know, these angels are here at the altar table with Christ, but these are carrying Christ away from the altar table, but we know that they're going to come back to the altar table, right? So it's this whole, it's trying to convey this continuous movement, this continuous liturgy that's happening without end. And again, we are tapping into that. We are linking into that when we come together as the faithful. And we know those of us who are, you know, have been attending services, maybe our whole life, maybe just a couple of months. We know that when we see the great entrance, we see the clergy coming out of the altar through this icon stand, the icon screen. And there's a procession that comes out, goes around a little bit, and then goes in. And so that's why we're going to talk today about the icon screen, the Iconostasis. Okay. Now, some of what we're going to talk about today may be elementary for some of you. It might be total review. Some, I'm hoping, though, that where this will link up with what we've briefly gone over with the Cherubic Hymn, I'm hoping that this will deepen our appreciation for what the Iconostasis is and really what the whole liturgy is by the time we're done this evening. So the word Iconostasis is Greek. It simply means icon stand, something that holds icons, basically. And this is probably the most readily recognizable part of an Orthodox church when you talk about coming into a space. I had the opportunity recently to show someone, a young adult, our church, who had never set foot in an Orthodox church before. And this probably occupied 90% of their attention the whole time that we were there. And they couldn't stop staring, they couldn't stop asking questions. And it connected so many dots for them. It was really something. So this is really an important feature in the Orthodox temple, and really it's like the focal point. I want us to take a look, though, at this quote that I've extracted from an article that I've linked to in that resource page that I've shared with you. It's a very dense reading. It's academic level reading. But if you can sort of soldier through it, it really has some pearls in it. And it's an article by a beloved professor and mentor of mine, Father Maximus Constas. And he wrote this several years ago in a volume that was about sacred space and thresholds of the sacred. In other words, a threshold, of course, is something that marks a line in a liminal space, meaning where you have to move from one side or one space to the other. And so he wrote in this about the icon screen. Now this little paragraph here is a little chunky, so let's try to work through it. And this is what he says about the icon screen. Drawn like a curtain across the architectural frontier of the sensible and the intelligible, linked to the presence of the deity in the tabernacle of Moses, and closely associated with icons, and especially the iconography of the Incarnation. The sanctuary enclosure, in other words, the Iconostasis, and its veiled portal were symbolic expressions of the Christian belief that the invisible God had been revealed to the world through paradoxical concealment in a veil of flesh. Now, that's a mouthful. Okay. But what he's saying here is the icon screen isn't just a big imposing wall that when we're building a church, we want to make sure we have an impressive one to show our neighbors when they come visit. In the space of the temple, it's not just a wall. It's actually something that reveals God while it's hiding him. That's what this last sentence means. This last phrase means that the invisible God had been revealed to the world through paradoxical concealment in a veil of flesh. God, who is invisible beyond all being, took on flesh for our salvation, so we could see him. This is the reason we even have icons in our churches in the first place. So let's just keep this whole thing in mind as we take a look at the icon screen. So this is a picture of our Econostasis here at St. Nektarios. Now, forgive me, I didn't have a better photo when I was working on this little presentation, so the ends are a little cut off, but that's okay. We'll still get what we need to out of this, I think. So what I'm going to do is, short of being able to sit in the church with you and walk around and point these things out, I tried to do that by way of this presentation. So let's see how it goes. So what we're going to do is sort of, first of all, label the sections of the icon screen and then take a look at the icons themselves. And first and foremost is this focal point. And this is what's called the beautiful gate, the Aurea Pili, the beautiful gate. Now, there is gate symbolism throughout Holy Scripture. There are two that we should perhaps think about. One is the vision of Ezekiel, the prophet Ezekiel, and it's actually read for feasts of the Theotokos, particularly the Annunciation, where he talks about where Ezekiel says he has this vision of the temple, and the Lord goes through the gate, and then it's shut, and it remains shut. And this became a prophecy, or was understood as a prophecy pertaining to the Virgin Mary, because after the Lord entered her, if we think of her as a temple, right, because God dwelt in her, that after the Lord entered her, her gate remained shut. She remained virgin. She never had other children. She's virgin before bearing Christ, virgin while bearing Christ, and virgin after. So it's an image, it becomes an image of the Virgin Mary. But it is also, if you look in the book of Revelation, John talks about his vision of the heavenly city and how it's a light. It doesn't need lights because it's lit by the light of God. And it says one of its gates remains open all day and all night. It doesn't close. And so when we have particular services, the gate remains open. And in Bright Week, am I getting confused? Or is it after Pentecost? Oh, because it doesn't get done everywhere. Sometimes we'll leave all the doors open in the altar for the period of time to sort of symbolize that the kingdom is open. There's freedom. There's movement. The Holy Spirit goes in and out, and we are not restrained in a way. So the gate has multiple symbolisms. Those are just a couple. But let's keep moving for the sake of time. Now, a couple of, just to sort of break this area down a little bit, there's what we would call the Vima, even though it's spelled with a B, it's pronounced with a V sound, the Vima door. And that Vima really just is another word for altar, okay? In Greek, this is called the Vimothira, the Vima door, the altar door. And then above that, you see this curtain, the veil. This really should be symbolism that's readily available to our minds, because we know that, for example, when Christ was crucified, we learned that the curtain or the veil of the temple was torn in two, right? And so this temple has a veil that is opened when the service is underway. The veil also serves as an icon of the incarnation, of Christ taking on flesh, as does the whole icon screen. Maybe we'll say more about that later, but the veil, there's a work called the Proto-Evangelion of James. And this book, while it never became canonical, it never became part of the scriptures, for example, it was still nonetheless accepted by the church as being valuable for reading. And what's special about this book is that it tells us about the life of the Virgin Mary. And one of the things that it tells us is that she was weaving or spinning yarn, I think, actually, for the temple veil. And this became, if we were able to zoom in on the icon of the Annunciation, often Mary is seen holding two spools of thread or yarn, often two different colors, blue and red usually, that when they're woven, of course, become purple. And that this veil becomes a symbol of Christ's flesh that he took from the Virgin Mary, the flesh that was knitted in her womb, and gave him form. And that goes back to what that quote from Father Maximus that I read to you, in that paradox that the invisible God came to us in a veil, right? So I'll say something else about that, hopefully give you an image that will help you understand what I mean when I'm trying to explain that. So that's one of the other symbolisms, let's say, of the curtain. Now, more broadly speaking, we have the main icons. Okay, these are usually, in an Orthodox church, the larger icons. And above that, we have, in this case, we have one upper register. I have some photos to show you after these slides that show a variety of different kinds of icon screens. Okay, so that's kind of the anatomy of the Iconostasis. Now, you know that there are other doors on it. I'll say more about that here shortly. But with regard to the particular icons, we're going to take just a couple of minutes to look at those as well. So the first two that I want to point out are the ones that are sort of staples that are there in, I would say, 95% of Orthodox churches that you would visit around the world. Jesus Christ, if you're facing the icon screen as we are now, will always be in that first position on the right, because he's Christ. And his icon is the most important icon. You may recall from reading or from Sunday school or from another A.R.E. presentation that the reason that icons factor in so heavily in the Orthodox Church, at least have for the last 12 centuries or so, is because during the time of iconoclasm, when there was fighting over whether or not images could even be used, the winning stance was that not only can we have icons, we must have them, because to not use icons, to avoid using them, especially to avoid them, is heresy. It is denial of the incarnation of Christ. Because if God did not actually become human, if he did not take on flesh, then we wouldn't be able to picture him. But because he did, okay, it's like I tell younger people when I'm talking about this, God became human. That means he walked among us. That means that if you had your phone with him, if he was here in 2021, you could take a selfie with him. You know, you would have photographs of him because he was real and with us in the flesh. And so the church said, no, you need to use icons, because this proclaims that God took on flesh and became one of us and became visible and depictable like us. And that went on, of course, to extend to all those who participated in the grace of God. So Jesus Christ's icon is there first and foremost. Then, of course, on the left, again, 9 times out of 10, you'll have the Theotokos, and not just her by herself, but holding Christ. There are some occasions where she is by herself. They're very rare, and it's for a particular reason, probably. But those two are going to be your right and left in the center there. Now, moving out one block on either side of them, on our right side again is St. John the Baptist, who, again, if there's room, if there's space, will always be there on that side of Christ, because he is the forerunner. He is the greatest prophet, the greatest to be born among women, as Christ said. And he was the one who proclaimed Christ to the world. And on the other side, next to the icon of the Theotokos in Christ, is the patron saint or the feast or event to which the church is dedicated. So, for example, here we're Saint Nektarios Church. So the icon is, of course, our patron saint. If you go to Holy Trinity, the Cathedral, they don't have a patron saint. They're dedicated to the Holy Trinity. So there's some icon there that tries to depict the mystery of the Holy Trinity, and so on and so forth in any Orthodox church. Now, this is such a beautiful tradition, because if you've ever had occasion, or if you ever do have occasion, to travel the world and end up in an Orthodox church in Asia, in South America, in anywhere, Africa, wherever, if you don't know the local language, as soon as you step into the church, you know whose church you're in or to whom it's dedicated. So it's this other layer of language that the church even has that helps us feel at home in a way. Continuing outward, we have the depiction of, usually the depiction of the Archangels Michael and Gabriel. I've talked about this recently. I don't know if it was on this this particular program. I think it might have been asked in my Becoming Orthodox class that I did. But somebody had asked about the symbolism of having the archangels there. And I said, and I'll say it briefly here, that Michael is on that north door, because that's kind of an exit door. That's like, if we have a deacon here and he comes out of that door, right? And it's used as a symbol of Michael, who is a guardian. And there's a guardian, of course, placed at the door, the gate of paradise, when Adam and Eve were evicted, which we're going to be commemorating here in a couple of Sundays before we start the fast. There was an angel placed to guard the gate to Eden. And so this in a way represents that. And then on the other side is Gabriel, who of course is the one that announced to Mary that she would bear Christ. And of course she accepted. And at that moment, God took on flesh in her womb. So again, another tie to the incarnation, the taking on of flesh of God, but also because this is the door that a deacon comes through, that it is Gabriel who welcomes us back in to paradise, right? So it's this circular movement. These are doors, by the way, in case you didn't know that. And these are sometimes called deacons' doors. And in some churches, there won't be archangels depicted there. There will be deacon saints. So you might have on one side Saint Stephen, the first deacon, and then maybe another deacon like Saint Ephrem the Syrian, or Saint Lawrence of Rome, or another well-known deacon, Saint Romanos the Melodist. These kinds of people. Now, in our parish, we also have on going farther out from either angel, we also have 2 other depictions. I don't have them pictured here. On your left is a depiction of the Holy Trinity, because this community came from Holy Trinity. And on the right is the elevation of the Holy Cross. And my understanding is that was done because as an homage, let's say, to Father Steve. he's Father Stavros. Stavros is cross. He celebrates his feast day on the day of the cross. And so these are the other two main icons that we have on our icon screen here at St. Nektarios. As you'll see in some of the pictures I have afterwards, that you can have many, many, many more icons, and far fewer in some cases. Now, this is the main level of icons. I'm going to pause here for just a second and just ask if anybody has any questions about anything that I've said up to this point. I think this is pretty straightforward. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. Oh, hang on, there was something in the chat. Let me just double check. Okay, yeah, so there are two questions that came in, or one, well, yeah, two questions. With reference to the curtain and the gates being open after Pascha, after the resurrection. Some places the question said, aren't they open for 40 days after Pascha? In some places, yes. In some places, it's the week after. Oh. So it varies, and if it's done at all, it's not always done. Oh. And then, let's see. There's another question related to the curtain. It says, why? Basically, why is the curtain closed or the gate closed? Depending on some, not all have both, but at some points it is closed at different parts of the liturgy. That's actually a question that could take us a while. You most commonly actually see this in monasteries, where after a certain point in the liturgy, once the gifts are brought in, the gate is closed. We sometimes see this in the pre-sanctified liturgy as well. And this is actually an ancient practice. Saint Simeon of Thessaloniki talks about this, and it has to do with the symbolism of again, concealing and revealing and these sorts of things. We can't really talk about it in depth tonight. If I think to, maybe I'll look into it a little bit more. The person who asked that is Chris, who joined us last week. She's a former parishioner of mine from up in New York, and that was the practice up there at that parish for us at Holy Communion. We would close the gate until it was time to bring it out for the people to receive. So you see some of these different practices from time to time, and they all come from different threads in a common tapestry. It's just some are emphasized in some places more than others. There's a question here that says, what are the icons on the right? Let me see if I can look back here. Let's see here. I'm not really sure I understand what icons are being asked about. I'm not really sure. Whoever sent me that message, if you want to send that again with a little clarification, maybe I can clarify. We're going to be staying actually on this view for a while, but I'm going to move on. Okay, it says the far right. I guess it's this one here that's outlined. This is Archangel Gabriel. If that's what I'm guessing is being asked about. Again, sorry I didn't have a wider shot. Oh, it says beyond that. So I can't see it here, but I'm pretty sure it's the icon of the elevation of the cross that's there. Sam is nodding in agreement, so I know I'm right. Catherine, are you raising your hand?
Yes.
Okay.
I just have a quick question back to the angels under the dome.
Okay.
Most of them, I understand what they're doing, but there's a couple on the right with the same view, and they have something over their heads.
Yeah, I can't get back to it now without messing up my whole slideshow. I'm not that adept.
I think you can see it from the picture.
Say that again. I kind of lost you there, Catherine.
I don't remember seeing it, but it's over here.
Okay. Well, I did point out last time, I think, that if you look closely at some of them, at least from the vantage point that we had in the shot that I shared, the angels were dressed in different ways. Some were dressed like deacons, some were dressed like priests. Now, some of them were carrying the shroud, right? Over their head. You couldn't even see the angels. You could just see like their torso and their feet. So that's basically like what you see happening in Holy Week when we carry, the shroud of Christ, with him on it. But the other ones that you might be referring to, you kind of see them with their heads covered, or maybe their hands are up like this. And that's actually them bringing in the gifts for the liturgy. That's actually the older practice, that they're actually held at head level or even on the head as the deacon is coming in with those items. Okay. You kind of see this still in the pre-sanctified liturgy, right? When the priest comes out with Holy Communion, right? It's not just the bread and wine at that point; it's Holy Communion, and we have the A.R.E, that cover over our head, and we're sort of bent over and holding the chalice and the paten up higher, which kind of harkens back to that older practice. Okay. Okay, somebody asked a good question about the two-headed bird. That one always gets a lot of questions, and it gets placed in different places. We have this big giant mosaic of the two-headed eagle on our solea. That's something that was adopted as an imperial insignia, basically, that for the Byzantine Empire, but it's not actually, from what I recall reading about it, it's not actually purely a Byzantine symbol. It's something that's older and was adopted. It's been said to represent the kingdom looking both ways. It can see basically all of its holdings, right? It's a symbol of power and the empire. Some have said that it's the church and the state. So I've never actually seen a clear definition of what it is, first of all, and why it's used in the church. But we know, however, that it made its way into the church due to imperial influence. Oh gosh, okay, all the questions are coming in now. This one, Dina asks with enthusiasm, ooh, what about the triangle eye sometimes carved on the iconostasis? Okay. If you're not familiar with what Dina is saying, you're better off. Yeah. This was actually something that probably the late 19th century to the mid 20th century, you would see in many places. You would see it on Mount Athos. You would see it in churches in Greece and other parts of the world. And my home parish in Virginia had one, and it was basically what looks like the eye on your dollar bill. That's at the top of the pyramid. It's that all-seeing eye. And that's basically what it was meant to be, is this idea that God sees everything. It was adopted from secular imagery. I'll probably catch flack for saying this, but I mean it's known as occultist imagery, Freemasonry and all this kind of stuff. So people see that, and that's where their mind goes, and they're like, "Oh, we're a bunch of Freemasons, or we're corrupted." But it's really just something that was adopted because. I think out of the good, because it meant, that God sees everything, and it was an icon or an image of that, that kind of thing. So that's what I know about it, Dina. I could be wrong, but that's what I know about it. You're right. Another question just came in: is there any significance to the little animals carved at the top of the iconostasis? I noticed that at other churches sometimes they don't have them. Again, thank you for that question, Joanne. That's a great question. This kind of falls under the category of it's one of those traditions. You'll see it in some places and you won't see it in others. And in a very simple way, we have them obviously on our iconostasis, which is made of wood, and it's very intricately carved. And so it's become a way of kind of sort of picturing abundance, picturing a sort of paradise, right? So you have these sort of exotic animals that might be depicted, like peacocks or sometimes unicorns or fish, and all these different kinds of animals that just try to evoke God's creation or paradise. And I'm sure some of them have some symbolism attached to them. But I wouldn't say there's anything, say, like dogmatic about it, something that's like central to our faith about them. Okay. All right. Thank you for all of those questions. I wasn't expecting those, but thank you for them. Well, we're going to continue here. At the top, I just wanted to point out here in our parish, we have at the top of the gate here, the mystical supper is depicted, and that's a very common depiction above the beautiful gate. And I think for obvious reasons, right? I mean, this is what we're gathering here to do. And it's reminding us, and it's making present really in a visual way, as icons do, the mystical supper, the Last Supper, where Christ was and where he instituted the Eucharist. And then finally, with regard to this phase, at the bottom here, usually on this gate, on the altar gate, is usually a depiction of the Annunciation. And again, very, very powerful imagery of God taking on flesh, of you have Christ taking on the veil of flesh, right? So again, that connection with the altar being that liminal space between the Holy of Holies, between heaven and between earth. And then the Theotokos herself being like a temple, being a veil in a way, and she's there weaving the veil, all kinds of very powerful imagery in that one icon, and that connection with the beautiful gate at the central focus of our worship experience. Because Christ says what at the mystical supper? He says, "This is my body, this is my blood." Well, where did he get that from? Down here, right? So very, very powerful imagery. So, and then at the top here, and again, this is just the program we have here at St. Nektarios. On this upper register, we'll see feasts of the Lord, or it's basically a life cycle of the Lord. Also, the life of the Theotokos, if there's room, and the Passion of Christ, which of course is tied in. It's part of his whole life. And if these depictions exist on the Iconostasis, then a lot of that will be determined. What's depicted will be determined by how much space there is. It's that simple. Just from what little I can make out on this screen we're looking at here, this looks like the baptism of Christ here, so theophany. This is the transfiguration of Christ. This looks like, I'm not sure what that is. This is the raising of Lazarus here. This is the entry into Jerusalem, so think Palm Sunday, the mystical supper. Here's Christ being humiliated with his robe and the staff and the crown of thorns, his crucifixion, being taken off the cross, being put in the tomb, and the resurrection, right? So all of these very, very powerful events are being depicted and literally put in our face. So what I'd like to do now is just take a little bit more time Evelyn, thank you, Evelyn. Of course, Evelyn has this information. Christ with the children. Thank you, Evelyn. That's what this one, where'd it go? This one here, between the transfiguration and Christ raising Lazarus. Okay. What I'd like to do is kind of, you all asked a slew of questions. Thank you for those. And assuming there aren't any more right now, I'm going to just move on and we're going to look at some examples of icon screens in different churches. Now, I don't know what all of these places are. Some of them I do. Some of them I've been to. I think I might have taken some of these, but if I know what it is, I'll point it out. There's not really too much to say about these, but you'll see that these are, varying levels of ornateness, varying levels of artistry. Some are carved wood, some of them are stone. This is all carved wood that is gilded, so it's overlaid with gold. And then, of course, there are icons that are affixed there. This, by the way, this item here that's sort of above, in case you're not familiar with that, what that is, it's basically a chandelier. It's a low-hanging chandelier that's very common in Orthodox churches, and
I just did that.
yeah, so that's what that is. Okay, there's a question from Chris here. She says, why do so many churches have huge chandeliers to the point that I have heard that there were many arguments? Well, you know, we like our light. And in many places, these chandeliers, like this one here is a perfect example, will be lit. You can see the candles here. You can see these look like beeswax candles. I'm guessing this is probably in a monastery somewhere. They'll be lit in the dark for a vigil or something. And then at Matins, which is taking place at the, you know, the deep of morning, so it's still dark, not only will it have this light that's sort of flickering off the gold and, you know, all this, it's already sort of visually intense. Then the monks will come out and start moving it and twirling it. So it'll start to move, and it's become this sort of, you know, just sort of reminding us that the whole creation is dancing around God. Again, that heavenly liturgy. It's a very, very, very powerful experience. If you've never seen it, maybe you will one day. But I mean, the practical reason for any lighting we have in church is light, so that we can see. Okay, but again, there's that symbolic level of you know, the light of God, that Christ is the light of the world, that we are to let our light shine before men. So these things, they all become intertwined here. Let's take a look at another one here. This is an older one. I'm guessing by looking at this is probably 17th century, maybe 18th century. I don't know where from. I just found it on the internet and it looked nice. But you see, first of all, I mean, you see that this is relatively small. So it would have been from probably a smaller church, very intricate, again, wood carving, gold leaf overlays, polychrome painting with icons set in. And this one here, you see it has the gate here, but then looks like it has another gate that has an icon of Christ in his extreme humiliation. So you see different images that evoke different themes, but still speak to the same, obviously to the same truth. Here's another from probably a church in Greece or Cyprus. You see here that this not only has an upper register, it has another register on top, and it's filled with all kinds of saints. Probably saints that are, you know, you're probably looking at apostles, prophets, you're probably looking at saints that are important to the local population there. And these things might depend on the shape of the building, how much space they have to work with, the budget the people are working with as well. Let's say, so Chris and Laura asked an interesting question about, it says, do I happen to know if the Western churches ever had an Iconostasis, or did they always have a different tradition with architecture? And that's a really interesting question. It's really probably more that the Eastern churches looked more like, in a way, looked more like what we might see in older Western churches. And we'll kind of see that in a little bit. I'll say a little bit more about that, I think, as we move on. A lot of what you see in the Orthodox churches, I mean, it has to do, on one hand, with aesthetics and different approach to aesthetics. But again, because of the effect that the iconoclast controversy had in the East, especially, there's just this explosion of iconography after that period. Now look at this one. This is probably somewhere, I would guess, in Russia, maybe Poland. Look how many levels of icons this has. And you have the Virgin Mary at the top, and St. John the Evangelist, and the cross, the crucifixion here. So very, very ornate, very solid. Okay, here's another. Again, more from maybe the Russian tradition, Russian inspired, maybe even Antiochian. Oh, okay, here's an example actually. If you look at the doors on either side of the one, on the side of Virgin Mary and the side of Christ, the people depicted here are not angels. These are deacons. So I'm guessing this is probably Saint Stephen. I'm not sure who this is. I can't see. So there's an example. And Joanna, I don't know if you can see, but they actually painted in some peacocks here. So you see grapevines, right? Which of course has the symbolism of Christ saying that he is the true vine. But then here we actually have these depictions of peacocks. So let's see here. Here's another that's much more imposing. This looks like something out of the 19th century. This is in a church in Greece, actually. This is St. Demetrios Church in Thessaloniki in Greece, which is a 6th century church. It's been ravaged by earthquakes and fire, so it's been rebuilt a number of times. But what you see here are a couple things we should maybe take a look at for a moment. First of all is the style of the Iconostasis. This is more in the style of what we would call templon, T-E-M-P-L-O-N. And this, to Laura and Chris's question, this is starting to where we're starting to see some familiarity and parallels with what was found in Western churches, and we'll see some more in some of the examples that I have here. And what you see here is a much in a way simpler layout. You have columns, you have marble screens here in this case, and then a single icon in each space, nothing on top, and this arched gate here with the door. But if you look in the foreground, well, look, there's another barrier, right? So you have this sort of chancel screen. There's this barrier that even blocks off the solea, right? So you see this actually in many churches in Greece. I guess there's more that could be said about it, but again, I'll talk some more about the Iconostasis as we go on, but one of the reasons for the Iconostasis and the divisions, the physical divisions in the temple plan, on one hand is that heavy and very powerful symbolism and the mystical connection that we make there. In other words, what we're actually participating in, the heavenly reality. But then when we sort of come back down to earth and we think in practical terms, we know for a fact that the early church gathered in homes, right? That they were breaking bread, they were having the Eucharist in people's homes. But we also know that they were worshiping in the temple. So there's some of this that on one hand is inherited from the vision of the temple, the completion of the temple of Jerusalem. But if we think about receiving communion, we know for a fact that people used to receive communion from the altar table. If you're in a small community and everybody's on the same page and everybody's taking the life seriously and everybody knows how to conduct themselves, everybody can sort of stand around and you know that nobody's going to act inappropriately. And it's not a big enough crowd that things might get out of hand. But as the community grows and as you start to get people who maybe don't take things as seriously, or, you know, they have a tendency to wander around or maybe, I don't know, lean on things like your altar table, then you need to be able to create some space. You need to be able to set aside space that is for one purpose and one purpose only. And that's another reason why the sanctuary is what it is, the A.R.E, the sanctuary, that place that's set apart, that only certain people have a need to be in. And in this case here, what we see here at St. Demetrios, there's even this idea that you need to sort of manage the crowds from coming up, because what do people do? they come up during the service and they'll kiss the icons, right? They'll put candles down here, they'll put flowers, and sometimes that can get out of hand. It can interrupt and disrupt the service. So again, it's kind of, there's that practical element of, let's say, crowd management, right? All right, so now we saw this already, actually. This is Christ the Savior Cathedral in Moscow. And this structure here, this is the Iconostasis. This is the templon. And it has some angled wings, right? And the space behind it here, this is the sanctuary. And there you have the curtain, you have the gate, you have the icons, Christ, the Theotokos, and the different saints. Okay, so this is just another manifestation, a different style, but with the same principles in place. This is another notable church. This is the Church of the Resurrection in Jerusalem. This is the church built over Golgotha and the tomb of Christ. And this is the main nave, looking at the icon screen in the main nave, which, as you may or may not know, that building, that church, the space is divided up between different sects. So the main space and the tomb of Christ and Golgotha, those are owned and run by the Orthodox Church. The Roman Catholic Church has a space under that roof. The Coptic Church is the Maronite churches. So there are different sects that have a stake under the roof, but the main parts are Orthodox churches. And so this is the Iconostasis in the main nave of the Church of the Resurrection in Jerusalem. And you see here these stone columns, you see these arches, and then you have the icons here. That in this case, they're painted, but they have over them this metal, this gilding that is embossed and that sort of outlines the figure, but it covers the painting to protect it. And you can see here there's a curtain, but there's no gate. Okay, so again, different variations on the same form. Interestingly, in case you haven't been there, directly behind you in this case would be the tomb of Christ. So that you're looking ahead to what would be the altar table through this gate, but directly behind you would be the tomb of Christ outside of let's say in the narthex of this space. And on the other side of this wall, on the other side of the Iconostasis and to the right, is a staircase that leads to Golgotha, where the crucifixion actually occurred. So it's all under the same roof. And this in Jerusalem, of course, this is an interesting example of how the architecture is built around the space and incorporates the space. Now, what we're looking at here is just kind of a different take on the same elements. This is the templon style, very simple, but this is made out of wood. This was actually built for a mission parish, but it's very nicely done. Hand-painted icons that are set into this very simple, right? 2 icons, the 2 doors, and the beautiful gate. And now I included this one. This is from a church in Greece. And you see, I mean, just the vertical dimension here. This is a beautiful example of older Orthodox Christian church architecture that is, again, Laura and Chris, this is closer to what would have been, what the 2 churches would have had in common in terms of architecture up to a certain point. And you see, the marble cladding on the walls. But what I want to draw your attention to is just this narrow portal here. This is the beautiful gate. You have one icon of Christ, the icon of the Virgin Mary, and that's it. But then look at everything else that you have here. So again, different plans, the space is handled in different ways, but to, again, impart the same understanding and information to the believer. Now, I've included here, you'll remember that 1 or 2 sessions ago, we talked about Hagia Sophia. And I came across these renderings online. These are just sort of made from people's reading of different accounts of what Hagia Sophia looked like. And they've reconstructed them using some relatively modern computer, programs. And so this is that. Remember, we talked about the ambo, right? The ambon that was ascended, and you would stand here and give the sermon or read the gospel, or someone would stand up here and chant. But I included this because what do we have behind it? This is the precursor to the icon screen at Hagia Sophia. This is the templon. And so you see the columns, you see the curtains hanging between them. This particular rendering, I'm going to show you another angle. It does not show you the icons hanging here, but there would have been embossed metal icons, engravings of Christ and the Theotokos and the apostles and prophets. We know that there was embroidery in some of the of Christ and some other scenes in some of the textiles there. But look at how this is laid out. This is the altar table. And it has above it what's called the kiborion, the ciborium, this columned and covered structure with another curtain. And this is really the precursor to what we have today. And after the iconoclastic period is when you would have had more of an influx of iconography displayed more prominently in these places. And then, of course, from there was development in the theology to the point that what we read, that first little excerpt we read before looking at the Iconostasis, it got to this very high level of symbolism and connectivity and connection with architecture, art, movement, song. All of these things have combined to evoke and express this one fundamental truth, that we are worshiping with the angels God who has come to be among us. Let's see here. Joanne says that's really cool. I agree. And then the rendering of Hagia Sophia looks a lot like renderings of the Tabernacle of Moses. Yes, and it's supposed to. That's not by mistake. And Theodora says very Western, right? That's what we would think. I mean, it's really we really don't understand. I don't think we really understand how. We know that Byzantine art developed and, in some ways became more ornate, became known for being more ornate, but we know from pre-iconoclastic images that it was usually a little bit more subdued, very in line with secular art, and in the case of Hagia Sophia, I mean, you see it here in the rendering. If you see the photos in person, or you see it in person, just all kinds of stone, all kinds of marble used to affect color, to in shape, revetments. So slices of marble that were cut in half and then butterflied. So you get patterns like what you see here, and just covered in gold mosaic, and handling the light and the smoke from the incense and the chanting, and with some imagery. We know that probably in the dome of Hagia Sophia was originally a cross, but there would have been figurative art as well. But of course, over the centuries, as this debate over images really ratcheted up, there would have been sculpture as well. But that really fell out of favor in the Eastern churches. Let's see here. Someone asked here, do I have any photos of the Panagia Chapel of the Diaconia Center? And they said they don't think it has an iconostasis. It doesn't. It has a templon. It has this low wall with some icons propped on it. But I've heard that a more proper iconostasis will be added, but I don't know. I'm not really privy to those plans. So Yeah, to Theodore's comment about it being very Western, one of the things we have to remember is that this was the Roman Empire. Constantinople was the Roman Empire, and churches were civic buildings. They were not private, things. They were civic buildings. And the first churches were converted buildings, like maybe a treasury or so they would have had that aesthetic to begin with. But it's really fascinating. But a lot of what I was going to say earlier is we don't really, today as 21st century Orthodox Christians, especially as Greek Orthodox Christians, we just kind of take for granted certain things with regard to the aesthetic that we see in our churches, and don't realize that a lot of these are influenced by Ottoman influence, especially the wood carving and the very intricate and ornate furnishings like that. So, I mean, you go to Constantinople, you go to Mount Athos, there's a lot of that style. But of course, those are many times overlaid onto much older and what we might consider Western or simpler styles. So I didn't intend for this to be an art history or architecture history overview. It's certainly not a study by any means, but I wanted to show you some examples, especially for those of you who may be new to the Orthodox faith, or maybe you haven't been able to travel and see many churches, especially in the old country, so to speak. And I had a couple of thoughts that I wanted to bring up for our consideration. Given what we've seen so far from the outset of this study of the liturgy, can we really say that in Orthodox worship that art is just art, or that a building is just a building, or that clothing is just clothing, or that our words are our words? That the liturgy is ours. They express our theology and our experience of Christ. And when I say our, I mean the church as a whole. From all the centuries past and what it has handed down to us in the paradosis, the tradition of handing over what it has known of Christ in its age. Because Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so even though our own individual experiences might not be there yet with regard to grasping some of these concepts, or we may never scrape the bottom of the barrel, it doesn't matter, because the liturgy is there and harnesses these things and passes down those things that are good and beneficial for our souls. This is why we as Orthodox, at least on paper, we have a respect for tradition, the holy tradition of the church, that we don't just go and do things willy-nilly. We don't just put this thing here in the church because I like it there, or we don't install this thing here because my yaya liked it there, or whatever it is. I mean, there's a place for that sort of popular piety. But we really do ourselves a disservice in a way when we don't understand what underpins so much of what we surround ourselves with. That all of the things around us, the art, the architecture, the clothing, the music, that all of these things are trying and do call into our presence the kingdom of heaven. And some of us will hit a wall, no pun intended. We'll think of church as this sort of thing that, well, this is what my parents did, this is what my folks did, and so I'm going to do it, and then I'm going to teach my kids to do it. And this is our culture. This is our thing that we do. And I like this church, or I don't like that church. And I go here because the icons look better, or I go there because the singing is better. We can have some human considerations when it comes to that. But if that's the level, if that's the superficial level at which our experience of church ends, we're not grasping, and will never grasp, the Cherubic Hymn, that we mystically represent the cherubim, and we sing the thrice holy hymn to the life-creating Trinity, and we are called to set aside all worldly cares so that we can receive the King of all. And this is what we're called to do in every day of our life, but as a body, as the people of God in the liturgy. So one of the things I said that I would share is just a little image to maybe hopefully help you, in case you were having a hard time with that language that was used about Christ revealing God by concealing him, or the Econostasis revealing heaven by concealing it. If you think about, if you can imagine an invisible sphere is in my hands. Okay, you can't see it. But then if somebody comes and takes a sheet of fabric and throws it over that sphere that's in my hands, then you can see it. Then it's there, it's palpable. You're seeing something that you couldn't see before. You're aware of something, but it's still hidden from you. And this is in a way what Saint Simeon of Thessaloniki and others who were quoted in this work that I pulled from to share with you at the outset of tonight's session. This is what they understood, that the bread that becomes the body of Christ, that the wine that becomes his blood, these are like veils that help us as mortals, because we have nothing else. We're not the angels. We have bodies, we have senses, we have weaknesses, and he's given us these means by which we are able to commune with him according to our nature. So the Iconostasis isn't so much keeping people out of the altar as it's revealing something about who God is. It's revealing the two natures of Christ, that he's at once invisible God, but visible to us. That there is really the connection now between heaven and earth, not a division. That wall has been broken down by the incarnation and the crucifixion and resurrection of Christ. That's what these things are there to evoke for us and communicate for us. So if we stop at the level of, oh, it's not fair that only certain people get to go behind the icon screen, we're never gonna progress, because that's not what it's about. Which is not to say that it's right that just anybody goes back there, because that's not the point. That's a discussion for another day. But anyway, this is what I wanted to share with you this evening. Of course, if there are any other questions right now, I will gladly take them. So this is the challenge for us. These things that we're learning about, remember, it's not about, like I said, it's not about us understanding the liturgy. It's about going deeper into the mystery. Maybe there's an aspect of our worship that we haven't appreciated before, or just haven't been aware of the intent behind why something was there or wasn't there. And these things should engender awe and humility and a thirst for Christ and for true worship of him. This has served the church well for 2,000 years, and it will continue to do so long after you and I are gone. So it's not about us insofar as what we think about things. This is the church's, this is Christ's, this is his liturgy that he has passed down to and through us. Before we close, I don't see any other questions, but before we close, maybe it might warrant, I don't want to do it in the context of this study on the liturgy, but maybe one of these days we can do a special on the Hagia Sophia, only because it was such a monumental and influential, I don't even want to say place, but place and thing and building. But there's really a lot that we can learn by studying it. But there is recently, in the last couple of years, there's a group of I call them music scientists, but musicians and liturgiologists, people who study liturgy, who recently recreated virtually the acoustics of Hagia Sophia and performed some chants that would have been chanted there. We know that the manuscripts survived to when the building was still being used as a church. And they produced a recording using this technology and using the manuscripts that they interpreted from the time, and did it in traditional, what we would call Byzantine chant. And I'm going to share a link for you, or with you, to one of their performances that I want you to take time tonight to listen to. And it's a recording of the Cherubic Hymn, and the text that we're most familiar with, let us who mystically represent. It is that Cherubic Hymn chanted in the first mode. This is done in a concert setting, but it's using the same technology. So I'm sharing the link with you now. If you have a good speaker system or set of headphones or something, use that. And I think the sound of this recording will perhaps tie together any of the loose ends from my poor words this evening of talking about a text, showing you some pictures, and expressing what those are trying to communicate for us. So take some time after our class this evening, if you can, or tomorrow, to listen to this recording, to get a sense of that otherworldliness to which our icons are chanting, and everything that we express materially in the church is trying to evoke in our lives as an icon of the kingdom. Oh, and Catherine asks, is this the same group with Costa Coquinas? Yes, it is. This is Capella Romana. They're based out of the Northwest. I'm personal friends with a few of the members, but they've just done some amazing work, and it's really, really something to listen to the work that they're doing, because these things help us appreciate what it is we have and maybe some things we could aspire to ourselves. So without any other questions about our subject matter tonight, I will say that's all, folks. All right, so.
Thank you.
Good night, Father. Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Thank you for your attention.